The most dangerous mistake is believing you already know who someone is before you know their story. The quiet warning might have sounded like ordinary wisdom on any other morning, but along the coastal highway outside Naval Station Norfolk, it became something far more powerful. A black sedan rolled steadily beneath the clear Virginia sky as fishing boats drifted across the distant harbor and American flags moved gently in the ocean breeze. The driver kept both hands calmly on the steering wheel, following every posted speed limit, while early commuters and military families filled the roads leading toward the base. Without warning, flashing blue emergency lights appeared in the rearview mirror. The sedan slowed immediately, signaling before pulling safely onto the shoulder. Several passing drivers glanced toward the traffic stop before continuing on their way. Officer Logan Pierce stepped out of his patrol vehicle with measured confidence, adjusting the radio clipped to his shoulder as he approached the driver's window. His attention settled almost instantly on the older black man sitting behind the wheel. The driver's charcoal jacket looked well worn but carefully maintained. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, his posture relaxed, and his expression remarkably calm. Logan briefly looked toward the rear of the sedan before speaking. "Do you know why I stopped you today?" The driver answered politely. "I believe you are about to tell me, officer." Logan pointed toward the back of the vehicle. "Your left taillight appears to be broken." The older man turned slightly, as though surprised by the statement, then nodded respectfully. "If there is a problem with the light, I appreciate you bringing it to my attention." The calm response somehow made Logan even more suspicious. Most drivers argued. Most offered excuses. This man simply accepted the conversation without resistance. Logan studied him for another moment before asking, "License and registration, please." The driver slowly retrieved both documents, careful to make every movement deliberate and visible. He handed them over with a courteous smile. "Here you are, officer." Logan examined the driver's license first, then noticed a military identification card resting beside it. His eyes narrowed as he looked from the card to the man sitting quietly behind the wheel. Something about the information did not match the picture he had already formed in his mind. Behind them, traffic continued flowing toward the naval installation, while a young couple walking along the waterfront slowed just enough to watch from a distance. An older veteran sitting outside a nearby coffee shop also glanced toward the roadside, sensing unusual tension in what otherwise appeared to be a routine stop. Logan looked again toward the rear of the sedan, then back at the driver. "Please step out of the vehicle." Without hesitation, the older man opened the door and stood beside the car with composed dignity, keeping his hands plainly visible. The morning breeze carried the distant sound of a Navy bugle rehearsal from inside the base, blending with the cries of seagulls circling above the harbor. Logan circled the sedan once more before returning to face the driver. His voice grew firmer. "Something about this situation does not add up." The older man met his eyes without anger, fear, or frustration. "Officer," he said quietly, "sometimes the quickest path to the truth begins by asking one more question instead of making one more assumption." Logan did not respond. Around them, a few more pedestrians had quietly stopped to observe, unaware that within the next hour the ordinary roadside shoulder overlooking the Chesapeake Bay would become the center of a lesson about judgment, humility, and the kind of leadership that never needs to announce itself. 4 hours earlier, the coastal city had awakened beneath a sky so clear that the first sunlight reflected across the calm waters of the Chesapeake Bay like polished glass. Fishing boats drifted quietly beyond the harbor, while sailors, civilian employees, and military families made their way toward Naval Station Norfolk for the annual remembrance ceremony honoring generations of men and women who had served at sea. The streets surrounding the installation carried the familiar rhythm of an American military community beginning another day with purpose. Among the steady stream of vehicles was an older black sedan driven by Admiral Charles Whitaker, a 60-year-old black United States Navy admiral whose name was recognized throughout the Navy even though many younger service members had never seen him in person. Charles had long believed that rank should never separate leaders from the people they served. Whenever official protocol allowed, he chose to travel alone, drive his own car, and experience ordinary life without ceremony. He often reminded younger officers that respect earned through daily actions lasted far longer than respect demanded by stars on a uniform. After stopping at a small waterfront coffee shop, Charles noticed an elderly veteran struggling to carry two heavy boxes filled with donated books for a local military family center. Without introducing himself, he quietly carried one of the boxes across the parking lot and carefully loaded both into the veteran's pickup truck. The grateful man thanked him warmly, assuming he had simply met another thoughtful neighbor. Charles smiled, wished him a good morning, and continued on his way with a paper cup of black coffee resting beside him in the passenger seat. A few minutes later, he noticed a young Navy sailor standing outside a convenience store counting loose change before reaching the register. Charles stepped inside, quietly paid for the sailor's breakfast and coffee, and left before the young man could even ask his name. He expected nothing in return because kindness had never required recognition. As he drove closer to the naval installation, the harbor slowly filled with activity. Tugboats crossed the shipping channel, American flags fluttered above government buildings, and the distant sound of a bugle rehearsal echoed across the waterfront. Charles lowered the driver's side window just enough to let the cool ocean air fill the car. The familiar sounds reminded him why he had dedicated more than 3 decades of his life to serving the country he loved. He glanced briefly at the folded invitation resting on the passenger seat beside his leather notebook before continuing toward the ceremony. He was scheduled to deliver the closing remarks later that morning, but very few people outside the senior command staff knew he would be attending. That anonymity suited him perfectly. He believed that the best way to understand the people entrusted to his leadership was to spend time among them without special treatment. As the road curved alongside the waterfront, Charles noticed families walking toward the base entrance carrying small American flags, while children laughed beside parents wearing Navy uniforms. He smiled quietly, grateful for the ordinary moments that reminded him what service was truly meant to protect. A few miles ahead, Officer Logan Pierce had just begun his patrol shift, completely unaware that within the next hour an ordinary traffic stop would become a moment remembered not because of authority, but because of the lasting difference between assumption and truth. Officer Logan Pierce had reported for duty before sunrise, expecting nothing more unusual than directing traffic near Naval Station Norfolk and assisting with the increased flow of visitors arriving for the annual remembrance ceremony. The briefing that morning had emphasized patience, professionalism, and heightened awareness because thousands of military personnel, veterans, and civilian guests would be traveling through the surrounding streets. Logan listened carefully, accepted his assignment, and climbed into his patrol vehicle believing that experience and instinct would be enough to manage whatever the day presented. For nearly 2 hours, everything unfolded exactly as expected. He helped an elderly couple find the visitor parking area, redirected delivery trucks around temporary road closures, and answered questions from tourists hoping to photograph the historic waterfront. The routine reinforced his confidence. Every decision felt immediate, practical, and correct. Then he noticed the older black sedan traveling toward the base. From a distance, nothing appeared unusual except what Logan believed was a damaged left taillight, reflecting unevenly in the morning sunlight. He slowed behind the vehicle for another block, watching carefully as the sedan maintained a steady speed, remained within its lane, and obeyed every traffic signal. Even so, something persuaded him to activate his emergency lights. The sedan immediately pulled onto the shoulder without hesitation. Logan appreciated the driver's cooperation, but as he stepped closer to the vehicle, another assumption quietly began taking shape. The older black driver seemed remarkably comfortable despite being stopped beside a military installation on one of its busiest mornings. His posture remained relaxed. His breathing appeared steady. He showed none of the nervous gestures Logan often associated with unexpected traffic stops. Instead of interpreting that composure as confidence born from experience, Logan began viewing it as suspicious. After requesting identification, he noticed the military credentials resting beside the driver's license. The rank displayed on the card immediately challenged what he believed he was seeing. He quietly compared the photograph to the man standing before him, then looked again at the simple charcoal jacket, the older sedan, and the paper coffee cup resting inside the car. In his mind, none of it matched the image he expected of a senior military leader. A Navy admiral, he assumed, would surely arrive with official transportation, aides, or visible security. The ordinary appearance of the driver became in Logan's thinking, another reason to doubt rather than another reason to ask questions. Across the street, people continued walking toward the waterfront carrying folding chairs, small American flags, and cameras for the ceremony. An elderly retired sailor sitting outside the same coffee shop where Charles Whitaker had stopped earlier glanced toward the traffic stop with quiet curiosity. Two young Navy sailors waiting to cross the street also slowed their conversation, sensing the interaction was becoming longer than a routine inspection. Charles Whitaker remained completely composed. He answered every question respectfully, kept his hands visible, and waited patiently for the officer's next instruction. The contrast between the Admiral's calm demeanor and Logan's growing certainty created a silence that seemed heavier with every passing moment. Neither man raised his voice. Neither interrupted the other. Yet the distance between assumption and truth continued to widen, and before long that quiet stretch of roadside overlooking the Chesapeake Bay would become the place where one ordinary decision began changing far more lives than either of them could possibly imagine. Charles Whitaker stood quietly beside his sedan as the morning breeze carried the scent of salt water across the roadside. The harbor remained peaceful behind him, and the distant sound of a Navy bugle rehearsal drifted through the air, reminding everyone that the remembrance ceremony would begin soon. Officer Logan Pierce examined the driver's license once more before turning his attention back to the military identification card. He studied the rank displayed on its surface, then looked again at the older man standing patiently before him. The calm confidence in Charles's posture continued to challenge every expectation Logan had formed. "Where did you get this military identification?" Logan asked. Charles answered with the same steady courtesy he had shown since the traffic stop began. "It was issued through the United States Navy." Logan looked unconvinced. "Do you expect me to believe that someone with this rank drives alone in an older sedan?" Charles smiled politely. "I expect you to believe whatever the facts eventually show." The answer, delivered without sarcasm or frustration, only deepened the officer's uncertainty. Logan slowly walked around the vehicle, stopping briefly near the left rear taillight. He leaned closer, brushing away a thin layer of road dust with the edge of his hand. For a brief moment, sunlight reflected across the lens, revealing that the light appeared intact after all. He hesitated, then stepped back without commenting on what he had noticed. Instead, he returned to Charles and folded his arms. "Something about this situation still does not seem right." Charles nodded respectfully. "Questions are part of your responsibility, officer." Logan waited, expecting the older man to continue defending himself. Instead, Charles remained silent, allowing the moment to settle naturally. Across the street, two Navy sailors quietly exchanged uncertain glances while an elderly retired sailor looked more closely at Charles's face. Recognition seemed almost ready to surface before slipping away again beneath the passage of time. Several pedestrians slowed their pace, sensing that the roadside conversation had become more serious than an ordinary traffic stop. Logan carefully placed the identification card inside a protective sleeve before slipping it into his notebook. "Until I know exactly who you are, I will keep these documents with me." Charles answered calmly. "I understand." There was no argument, no complaint, no demand for special treatment. His patience created a silence that felt heavier than raised voices ever could. One of the younger officers who had just arrived to assist quietly approached Logan and spoke in a low voice. "Should we contact Naval Base Command? If those credentials are genuine, they can verify everything quickly." Logan glanced toward his colleague before looking back at Charles. Pride and uncertainty competed quietly behind his expression. "Not yet," he replied. Charles finally spoke again, his voice measured and respectful. "Officer, there is a simple way to resolve this without delay. Please contact Naval Base Command. They know I am expected this morning." Logan did not answer immediately. He looked once more toward the harbor, then toward the growing number of curious onlookers gathering along the sidewalk. The morning remained calm, yet the atmosphere had unmistakably changed. Every passing second seemed to carry more weight than the one before it. Somewhere beyond the waterfront, another bugle call echoed across the naval installation as Charles stood with unwavering composure, fully aware that truth required no urgency because it always arrived in its own time, even when assumptions reached their destination first. The silence surrounding the roadside stop grew heavier as more people quietly noticed that the conversation had lasted far longer than an ordinary traffic inspection. Morning traffic continued moving toward Naval Station Norfolk while pedestrians along the waterfront slowed just enough to glance toward the patrol vehicle before continuing on their way. Charles Whitaker remained exactly where Officer Logan Pierce had asked him to stand, his posture relaxed, his hands plainly visible, and his expression unchanged. Years of military leadership had taught him that patience often revealed more than arguments ever could. Logan carefully held the military identification inside its protective sleeve while looking from the card to Charles once again. The information before him refused to match the picture he had already created in his mind. "You understand why I have questions?" Logan said. Charles answered with quiet sincerity. "Yes, officer. Questions are part of responsible service. Conclusions should always come after the answers." The words lingered between them. One of the assisting officers shifted his weight before speaking softly enough that only Logan could hear. "We really should verify this with Naval Base Command." Logan remained silent for several moments. Around them, two young sailors waiting near the crosswalk continued watching discreetly while the elderly retired sailor across the street narrowed his eyes, studying Charles with growing curiosity. Even the couple walking along the harbor had paused beside the railing, sensing that the respectful but unusually prolonged encounter was approaching an important moment. Charles finally spoke again. "Officer, if you contact Naval Base Command, they will confirm why I am expected this morning." Logan looked toward the naval installation rising beyond the waterfront. The recommendation was reasonable. It required only a brief verification through official channels. Yet admitting the need for confirmation also meant acknowledging that his first impressions might have been incomplete. After another long pause, he turned toward the assisting officer. "Open the secure communications channel." Within moments, the request reached the naval installation. The dispatcher answered professionally before transferring the inquiry to the command duty office responsible for confirming official visitors. Logan identified himself, provided the information from the military identification card, and waited. Charles remained quietly beside his sedan, watching seabirds glide above the Chesapeake Bay while the cool ocean breeze carried distant bugle notes across the harbor. Less than 2 minutes passed before the secure line came alive again. The duty officer's voice was calm, precise, and unmistakably authoritative. "Officer Pierce, remain on the line. The individual currently with you has been positively identified as Admiral Charles Whitaker, United States Navy. He is scheduled to deliver remarks during this morning's remembrance ceremony. Senior command representatives are proceeding to your location now. Please ensure the Admiral remains comfortable while they arrive." Logan's expression changed almost instantly. Every assumption he had carried throughout the morning quietly began to dissolve. He lowered the radio slowly, looking toward Charles with new understanding while the assisting officer remained speechless beside him. In the distance, several dark Navy command vehicles appeared beyond the main entrance road, moving steadily toward the waterfront without urgency, but with unmistakable purpose. Along the sidewalk, conversations gradually stopped as curious onlookers sensed that something extraordinary was unfolding. Charles simply offered a calm nod, neither celebrating nor criticizing anyone, because he had learned long ago that truth never needed to raise its voice when patience had already prepared the way for it. Several dark Navy command vehicles approached along the waterfront boulevard with quiet precision, their polished exteriors reflecting the morning sunlight shimmering across the Chesapeake Bay. No sirens sounded. No unnecessary urgency filled the air. Yet every person standing near the roadside instinctively sensed that the atmosphere had changed. Sailors walking toward the remembrance ceremony slowed their pace. Families carrying folding chairs stepped respectfully aside. Even passing motorists glanced toward the growing procession before continuing through the intersection. The first vehicle came to a smooth stop a short distance from Charles Whitaker's sedan. Moments later, 2 senior Navy officers stepped out wearing immaculate service uniforms, followed by a command master chief and members of the installation. Command staff. Their expressions reflected professionalism rather than alarm. Rear Admiral Susan Keller walked directly toward Charles without hesitation. She stopped in front of him, rendered a precise salute, and spoke with calm respect. "Good morning, Admiral Whitaker. We appreciate your patience, sir." Headquarters confirmed your arrival several minutes ago, and we apologize for the delay. Charles returned the salute with the same quiet dignity that had defined every moment of the morning. Good morning, Admiral Keller. Thank you for coming. There has simply been a misunderstanding. His voice carried no resentment, only the calm certainty of someone who believed that truth did not require anger to be heard. Officer Logan Pierce remained standing beside his patrol vehicle, still holding the protective sleeve that had contained the Admiral's identification. The realization of what had occurred settled heavily upon him as the assisting officer quietly lowered his notebook without saying a word. Across the sidewalk, the elderly retired sailor who had watched the entire encounter slowly removed his cap and smiled with recognition. I remember him, he whispered to a nearby family. He spoke to our crew years ago. He has always carried himself exactly like this. Admiral Keller turned politely toward Logan. Officer, may we have the Admiral's identification, please? Logan immediately stepped forward and carefully returned both the driver's license and military credentials with visible respect. Admiral Whitaker, he said sincerely, I owe you an apology. I should have verified the facts before allowing my assumptions to guide my judgment. Charles accepted the documents without even looking at them before placing them calmly inside his jacket. He met Logan's eyes and answered gently. Officer Pierce, every profession entrusted with public confidence carries enormous responsibility. Verification protects everyone. It protects citizens, officers, and the integrity of the institutions we serve. Those standing nearby listened in complete silence. The lesson carried greater weight because it was delivered without anger or humiliation. Several young sailors exchanged thoughtful glances, realizing they had witnessed leadership expressed through restraint rather than authority. Admiral Keller then gestured toward the naval installation. Sir, the ceremony is ready whenever you are. Charles nodded but paused before taking his first step. He looked once more toward Logan and offered a reassuring smile. Today is about remembering service and honoring those who came before us. Let us make sure we also remember that respect should never depend upon appearances. Logan quietly nodded, understanding that the most important lesson of his career had arrived not through punishment, but through the patience of a leader who chose wisdom over pride. As Charles walked toward the waiting command vehicles beside the waterfront, sailors standing within view instinctively straightened their posture, not because rank demanded it, but because genuine character had already earned their admiration long before anyone recognized the stars he wore in service to his country. The remembrance ceremony began beneath a brilliant Virginia sky as Navy personnel, veterans, military families, and civilian guests gathered along the waterfront with quiet anticipation. A military band played softly while rows of American flags moved gently in the ocean breeze, their steady rhythm reflecting the calm dignity of the occasion. Admiral Charles Whitaker walked beside Rear Admiral Susan Keller toward the reviewing platform, greeting every sailor, volunteer, and guest with the same warm respect he had shown long before anyone recognized his position. He thanked an event volunteer arranging chairs, paused to shake hands with a retired chief petty officer, and smiled at the young sailor whose breakfast he had quietly purchased earlier that morning. None of those gestures appeared planned. They were simply the habits of a leader who believed that character should remain constant regardless of who happened to be watching. Officer Logan Pierce stood near the edge of the ceremony area after receiving permission to remain as an observer once his shift responsibilities had been reassigned. His thoughts replayed every decision he had made that morning, and for the first time. In many years, he questioned not only the conclusions he had reached, but also the assumptions that had quietly guided them. Before the ceremony officially began, Rear Admiral Keller informed Admiral Whitaker that senior representatives from the police department had already requested a formal review of the roadside incident. Charles listened respectfully before answering with the same calm certainty that had carried him through decades of service. A review should always seek improvement before blame, he said. Public trust grows stronger when institutions are willing to learn. Keller nodded thoughtfully. Would you like to recommend any specific action, sir? Charles looked across the audience where children sat beside decorated veterans, active duty sailors, and families who had sacrificed alongside them for generations. Every officer deserves the opportunity to strengthen professional judgment, he replied. Verification, patience, and respect protect everyone equally. Those principles should never depend upon rank, appearance, or circumstance. Several senior officers standing nearby quietly exchanged thoughtful glances, recognizing that his recommendation focused on strengthening the system rather than humiliating individuals. A short time later, Officer Pierce approached the Admiral once more, no longer carrying authority, but carrying genuine humility. "Admiral Whitaker," he said sincerely, "I have spent this entire morning thinking about what happened. I understand now that confidence without careful verification can lead good people toward poor decisions. Thank you for responding with patience instead of resentment." Charles smiled warmly. "Officer Pierce, every profession that serves the public requires constant reflection. Sailors learn from experience. Police officers learn from experience. Leaders continue learning for as long as they accept responsibility for the people they serve." Nearby, the elderly veteran Charles had helped earlier recognized him completely and quietly shared the story with several young sailors listening nearby. The little moments of kindness that had gone unnoticed that morning now carried deeper meaning than any title ever could. As the ceremony continued beneath the American flag, the focus slowly shifted away from a roadside misunderstanding and towards something far more lasting. Those who had witnessed the events realized that true leadership was never measured by the stars on a uniform alone. It was revealed through humility during moments of misunderstanding, fairness during moments of uncertainty, and the quiet determination to leave every institution stronger than it had been the day before. As the final speaker stepped away from the podium, the applause faded into the gentle sound of waves rolling against the harbor, leaving behind a thoughtful silence that seemed to settle over every person gathered along the waterfront. Admiral Charles Whitaker remained standing near the memorial, speaking quietly with Gold Star families, retired sailors, and young service members who had waited patiently to thank him for his words. He never hurried through those conversations. Every handshake lasted a little longer than expected. Every question received his complete attention. It was the same quiet leadership that had defined his career long before anyone outside the Navy recognized his name. A short distance away, senior representatives from the city police department arrived at the ceremony after receiving a detailed briefing regarding the roadside incident. The chief of police walked alongside the department's professional standards commander, both wearing expressions that reflected the seriousness of their responsibility. They were not there to create a public spectacle or assign blame in front of a crowd. They were there because public trust demanded careful accountability whenever questions about professional judgment arose. Rear Admiral Susan Keller introduced the chief to Admiral Whitaker before quietly stepping aside. The chief extended his hand respectfully. "Admiral Whitaker, on behalf of our department, I want to thank you for the dignity and patience you demonstrated today. We have already initiated a comprehensive review of the incident and of our related training procedures." Charles accepted the handshake with the same calm expression he had carried throughout the day. "I appreciate your willingness to examine the process," he replied. "Strong institutions become stronger when they are willing to learn." The chief nodded. "We intend to evaluate our decision-making protocols, our verification procedures, and additional training focused on impartial professional conduct. Every member of our department deserves the opportunity to improve, and every member of our community deserves confidence that fairness guides every interaction." Nearby, Officer Logan Pierce listened quietly. Those words carried unexpected relief because they focused on responsibility instead of humiliation. Charles noticed Logan standing a few yards away and invited him to join the conversation with a simple gesture. Logan approached respectfully. "Admiral, I understand now that one decision can affect far more people than the individuals standing on the roadside." Charles answered gently. "That is true for every profession built upon public trust. Every decision teaches someone something. The question is whether we allow it to teach wisdom." The surrounding officers, sailors, veterans, and families listened without interruption. No one needed dramatic speeches because the lesson had already become visible through the events of the day. The elderly veteran Charles had helped earlier quietly smiled as he watched younger sailors discussing the importance of humility in leadership. The young sailor whose breakfast had been purchased that morning finally discovered the identity of the generous stranger and simply shook his head in quiet admiration. Even the little moments that had seemed insignificant only hours earlier now carried lasting meaning. As the afternoon sunlight reflected across the Chesapeake Bay, conversations gradually shifted away from the roadside misunderstanding and toward the values that united everyone present. Respect, patience, accountability, and service became the lasting memory of the day. The incident itself would eventually become another case file reviewed by professionals, but the lesson behind it would continue traveling far beyond one department, one ceremony, or one community, reminding everyone who heard the story that genuine authority is strongest when it is guided by humility, strengthened by truth, and measured by the fairness shown to every person before assumptions are ever allowed to become conclusions. Late afternoon sunlight stretched across the Chesapeake Bay as the last guests slowly departed the remembrance ceremony, leaving behind rows of carefully folded chairs, quiet memorial displays, and American flags still moving gently in the coastal breeze. Admiral Charles Whitaker walked alone toward the small parking area where his older black sedan remained exactly where he had left it earlier that morning. He carried the same leather notebook, the same invitation, and the same paper coffee cup that had long since gone cold. Nothing about his appearance suggested that he had become the center of one of the most important lessons many people present would ever witness. A few yards behind him, Officer Logan Pierce stood silently, watching the Admiral prepare to leave. He knew this would likely be their final conversation. Taking a slow breath, he walked forward with quiet determination. "Admiral Whitaker," he said sincerely, "before you leave, there is one more thing I need to say. I cannot change the assumptions I made this morning, but I can decide what kind of officer I become tomorrow because of them." Charles turned with the same calm expression that had never changed throughout the day. "Officer Pierce," he answered gently, "every meaningful career is built one decision at a time. None of us becomes better by pretending we have never made mistakes. We become better by refusing to repeat them." Logan nodded thoughtfully. "I hope I earn that opportunity." Charles smiled. "Every new day offers it." Nearby, the chief of police quietly watched the exchange before joining them. "Admiral," he said respectfully, "our department has formally initiated a comprehensive review of our procedures, supervision, and professional development. This is not about finding one person to blame. It is about ensuring that every future decision reflects fairness, verification, and respect." Charles extended his hand. "Then today has already accomplished something worthwhile." The handshake lasted only a moment, but everyone watching understood its meaning. Institutions grow stronger when they choose accountability over defensiveness and improvement over denial. Across the parking lot, the elderly veteran climbed into his pickup truck with a quiet smile. The young sailor who had received breakfast earlier saluted respectfully before leaving with his unit. Families gathered their children and continued home carrying small American flags that fluttered softly in the evening breeze. Life moved forward exactly as it always had, yet something invisible had changed inside many hearts. Charles opened the driver's door of his sedan, paused for one final glance toward the naval station, and looked at the American flag flying above the waterfront. For a brief moment, the harbor became perfectly still. Seagulls circled overhead while the last notes of the military band faded into the distance. He smiled quietly, started the engine, and drove away without escort, without ceremony, and without asking anyone to remember his name. Those who had witnessed the events of that day would remember something far greater than a title or a uniform. They would remember that true leadership remains calm when misunderstood, that genuine strength never depends upon recognition, and that justice begins the moment people choose evidence over assumption. Because rank may command attention, authority may enforce responsibility, and uniforms may represent service, but character is the only thing that continues speaking long after every badge, every star, and every ceremony has faded from view.